I'm Rajiv Chandrasekaran of the Washington Post. And the five of us here are what's sitting between you and heading out for a little break this afternoon. Look, that word hero, which we've been focused on so much today, in some senses has become very overused, commonplace, borders on the cliche at times. And yet that word, hero, is meant to signify someone exceptional, unique, even superhuman. If there's one thing that the summit has demonstrated today, it's that the vast spectrum of heroic actions and traits, physical, moral, intellectual, and yes, even political courage. I know that everyone on the stage has their own definition of heroism in the 21st century. With us today, just a remarkable group of individuals. Author Anchee Min, retired Marine Corps General John Allen, New York Times columnist, David Brooks, and Nobel Prize-winning writer Wole Soyinka. Each of them are heroes in their own right. Anchee survived a brutal Chinese labor camp and then went on to display another sort of courage. She laid her life bare in two brutally honest, critically acclaimed memoirs. Wole stood up to political repression in his native Nigeria for decades, using drama and literature to eliminate the abuses of those in power. David displays remarkable coverage every few days when he challenges all of us through his incisive arguments on the nation's most influential op-ed page. And John has led men and women in battle in Afghanistan and Iraq. He was the principal architect of the Sunni awakening that helped to end the war in Iraq. And in recent years, he's helped to organize an honorable end to America's engagement in the Afghan war. All of them have observed heroism in others, and they have thought about what gives rise to heroic behavior in people. So let's get started. Anchee, you've endured some very, very painful experiences in your lifetime. Describe for us briefly what you faced each day as a young woman in China in that labor camp.
I lived with a sense of honor, or I would say today, a false sense of honor. I was born in the Korean War and then raised during Vietnam War. I like to make a footnote that our leader, Chairman Mao Zedong, made these two wars China's war because America played a role that during our civil war with Mao's enemy, supported Mao's enemy, Chiang Kai-shek. So Mao wanted to get back to that, so he made that the war. So to us, America was our biggest enemy, and they were in Korea or in Vietnam. China was the next. So we were taught that, cultivated in this sense of honor that we're starving, but we're working to liberate the world. We don't have anything to eat, so we work so the American poor kids can eat. That was what I taught in the kindergarten. And when I was second grade, we went to see the movie, it's called Hero, 英雄儿女. And it's about how how a Chinese soldier take down the American Marine, and how he light the fuses and how he light the explosive and jump into a group of Marine and take them down and blow himself too. And my dream was to be the hero, because to die in such a glorious fashion was really attractive to the young generation. Today I see General Allen and I have flashbacks. Because my biggest fear was not being able to carry out my mission, and it's always something going wrong. Either in my dreams, nightmares, every night, like I would not be able to light the explosive. It got wet, or I tripped myself. The fuse is not working. So these things bother me, that I let my comrades down and then let the Americans take their lives. And during the day, I would go to, I was at the school and the society, and it was said that the goal is to take down American soldiers. It's called 干掉一个够本，干两个赚一个. You bring down one American soldier, you make your capital back. If you bring down 2 American soldiers, you made a good business. Mao says we don't have enough equipment, military, but we do have endless body support. So it wasn't until 1976 Mao died, we, as a nation, we woke up and we felt we were fooled. Today, if you go to China, when you mention the word hero, people would say, are you okay? Are you mentally sound? 你有毛病吧? So we see that the flip side of hero is idiot. So from then on, we know that this is the best thing that happened to China. I think that the political maturity for Chinese, and we know we don't have a father figure. We're on our own. So the only way to save ourselves is be our own hero. I'm sorry, I'm not off the topic.
No, this is fascinating. When did that transformation occur for you?
It was when I was in the labor camp and I was growing rice and cotton in Vietnam, and I had a broken back and carrying manure injury, and I found that we were barely feeding ourselves. How can we possibly support Vietnam? And we were not allowed. In my labor camp, we had over 20,000 youth from age 17 to 25. We were not allowed to any personal life. Basically, everything's inside a mosquito net. We were not allowed to date. And the price of dating is a severe punishment. And we had no life. So I realized that I was just, life was not worth living. So it was very hard to even try to make sense out of it or even die. So when I came to America, I was 27 years old. In China, I was called a cooked seed, and I have no chance to sprout. But it was in America, and I was given a chance to live in the bottom of American society and made my way up. And I just feel like the best thing I can repay America, that as the Chinese traditions saying says, to pay for a drop of water in drought with a well. And I feel the best thing I could do for America is to bring understanding of China, because I found that Americans don't know China, and the China that you know is not the China I know. So I feel, the writing that came to me.
I'd like to turn to Wole and talk about the roots of your activism, of your courage, and going back to Nigeria in the 1960s. What propelled you as a young man into activism? What propelled you to go take over a radio station at gunpoint as a young man?
I was acquitted in court of that crime. So be careful. But let me very quickly begin by saying that, because I say this only because of the introduction you made, and I was hoping that we wouldn't get that kind of introduction. I consider myself part of this panel objectively. Recently, I've been reviewing some books contradicting story by some generals in our own civil war, and I've enjoyed myself enormously, contrasting claims of heroism and cowardice and so on and so forth. And so I'm here totally detached. I'm sure other people have said the same thing, but I'm just excusing my presence here as somebody who discusses all subjects under the sun, including heroism. Having said that, let me just confess that I'm also, I've come to the conclusion that I'm a closet glutton for tranquility. And I love peace, and I love beauty. And I think I'm so committed to those that I'm ready to kill anyone who disturbs my tranquility. And so, since contradicting situations make it impossible for me to enjoy what I really love, whether it's beauty of music and to write, I find that I have no choice but to go for those who are responsible for disturbing that tranquility. And that's those who torture others, who reduce the dignity of other people, who exploit others, just so I can get back to my real profession, which is writing. I think that's the only explanation I have for you.
General Allen, you know, a few years ago, when you were the commander in Afghanistan, you commended me to read Lord Moran's The Anatomy of Courage. You've quoted a line in that book many times to your troops over the years. It reads, "A man of character in peace is a man of courage in war." There's a perception out there that at times amazing acts of heroism on the battlefield are often the result of split-second instinct. I didn't think about it, I just charged ahead to save my buddy. Is it instinct? And if it is it happenstance, or does it have roots in something deeper, in an individual's character?
Well, it's a very important question. It's at the heart of the discussion about what constitutes heroism and courage. Lord Moran was a surgeon on the Western Front in World War I, and he, in addition to repairing the thousands and thousands of young bodies that were crushed in the horrific conditions of that war, he observed what it was that made a man go over the top. Why would an individual follow an order that would send them nearly to their certain death? And he ultimately concluded, as you correctly stated, with the line, if you know a man of character in peace, you'll know a man of courage in war. But he also made a very important point, and it's also in that passage. And that point is that character, as he defined it, character as that foundational element, which is really essential to courage and ultimately heroism. Character is the daily habit of doing right versus wrong, the habituation of taking the harder right way than the easier wrong way, placing your moral courage ahead of all other things. And so his sense was that in an environment, in a society where we value above all other things, someone who has mastered the habit, who actually lives the values for which they stand and the principles that they espouse, and are able to inspire those around them. Inspire derives from the word to fill with the Spirit, to fill them with the spirit of your values. That, in essence, is a man's or a woman's character. And his sense was that war has no power to transform. You know, we often see in movies, popular movies, that someone suddenly has this transformative experience, an epiphany in war, which turns them into a great and gallant hero. His view, and it's frankly my view, is that a man or woman of character will act in ways that will evidence extraordinary courage under pressure and under fire and under duress. And you used the word instinct a moment ago, and you're exactly correct. If we're dealing with men and women of character for whom their lives have been based on doing right versus wrong and have created a habituation to that end, then when faced with that, and this term we hear all the time in our lives, that moment of truth, the moment when you must decide what you will do. And you don't have long, you have a moment. It's that moment of instinct. When faced with that moment of truth, if you are a man or woman of character, you will do the right thing. And your tendency, your instinct will be to do the right thing, which in most cases, often, results in acts of courage, which we then define as heroism. And we celebrate heroes. We celebrate heroes, but in the world I lived in, both in combat, but also in my own service, the Marine Corps, not only did we celebrate acts of individual heroism, because it importantly fed the narrative of gallantry and intrepidity, the narrative of selflessness and the willingness to sacrifice. It fed that narrative for the benefit of the service. But we also sought in every possible way to create that culture of self-sacrifice and that culture that celebrated the character of doing right versus wrong every single day, so that when faced with that moment of truth in combat, your instinct is to do the right thing, to take that courageous act, and someone to celebrate you as a hero.
David. David, let's build on that. You've written a lot about the loss of higher ideals and moral values and a sense of duty in American society today, and how that's leading us to an increasingly individualized society. How is heroism achievable within this increasingly atomized society that we live in? How is our culture of the individual and individual ambition redefining what it means to be a hero in America today?
I thought you were going to ask me about my heroic behavior as a regular panelist on Meet the Press. A little absurd me being up here. You know, I would focus on the one word you used, which is the word ambition. So we're raised in a meritocratic society where kids are raised from birth to get into Harvard. Moms and dads flashing little Mandarin flashcards at the things as they emerge from the womb to get them ready for the admissions tests. And so we're given a certain pedagogy to how to do that, how to succeed in the type of business that you and I are in, at least. And if it's a pedagogy described in a book I hope a lot of you have seen by Dr. Seuss called Oh, the Places You'll Go. And the metaphor is life as a journey. You go outward and you experience certain things and you acquire skills, and it's additive. Every day you have a new skill that you acquire. And to me, that's the life a lot of us have lived, but that is the pedagogy of achievement. It's not the pedagogy of character, which is often different. And there are many different pedagogies of character. One of them is the Athenian one, which the general just described, the pedagogy of honor and sacrifice for cause and country. The one that fascinates me is the pedagogy of self-confrontation, where you don't see life as a journey, you see life as an internal war against your own sin and weakness. And you see, if you look at a lot of people, you see their lives as essentially that battle, which is the most dramatic thing and the most central activity of their lives. So for example, I'll tell two quick military stories. Ida Eisenhower is a young woman who was Eisenhower's mom. Her mom dies when she's 5, her dad dies when she's 7. She becomes like basically an indentured servant. When she's 15, she decides to hell with this. The family's out for a picnic. She walks to Virginia and gets herself a high school degree. This is about 1870. Then she walks to Kansas and gets herself a college degree. Remarkably independent woman at that time. Her son, Dwight, is 8. He wants to go out trick-or-treating. Mom won't let him. She's part of the Brethren sect, doesn't really approve. Ike loses his temper, punches the tree in his front yard until he rubs all the skin off his fingers. Ida sends him to his room, lets him cry for an hour, goes up there to bind his wounds, and says to him, a quote from Proverbs, "He that conquereth his own soul is greater than he who taketh a city." And 76 years later, when Eisenhower writes his memoirs, he says that's the most important conversation of his life, because it was taught him about the weakness within himself, which was his passion and his rage, and that he would have to defeat it throughout his life. And we think of Ike as this affable, charming guy, but in fact, through the wars and through his presidency, filled with rage, filled with anger, but develops an ability to defeat that. And so to me, that act of lifelong self-defeat is the centrality of character. And the one other quick story I'll tell is about another great man who self-defeated, which is George Marshall. My favorite Marshall story happens in about 1942-43. FDR is choosing the person to lead Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion. Whoever runs that operation will be leading a great operation. Marshall wants to do it. But he has a rule that he will not advertise for himself. So FDR brings him to the Oval Office, says, "General, would you like to run Operation Overlord?" And Marshall, instead of saying yes and getting the command, says, "My own personal feelings should have no bearing on your decision." And he just won't go there. FDR asks him 4 times. 4 times he will not go there. He gives the job to Dwight Eisenhower. And Marshall's crushed. But that's the code of self-defeat, defeating your own ambition. And so to me, that's the central logic that is tough for us meritocrats to master.
Too often, David, though, do we confuse a degree of altruism or supposed altruism with heroism these days? I ask this because the words of one of my favorite columns of yours ring in my mind as we have this discussion. And let me read you the last 2 lines of it and just refresh your memory. You write, this was last May, "It's worth noting that you can devote your life to community service and be a total schmuck. You can spend your life on Wall Street and be a hero. Understanding heroism and schmuckdom requires fewer Excel spreadsheets, more Dostoevsky and the Book of Job.
Well, you know, a lot of college students think there are two courses through life: the corporate sellout cog, in which you destroy your soul but make some money, and then the Teach for America Nobility NGO Bono life, where you wind up on mom's couch. And see, these are the two courses. But the quality of character is you can be a self-defying hero in either of those two places. And so, to me, how do you learn to develop those traits? There are really three ways that I think people improve their character. It's not taught in a textbook. The three ways are imitation, by finding people you really admire and then following them and just doing what they do. The second is by, as Aristotle would say, the habits of self-control, practice minutely so they come into contact at the big moments, the habits of self-control are there. And then the third, I think, is through emotional education through literature. And that by educating your emotions through novels, that you really have refined your instinctive and unconscious responses. And it's those three things you have to do.
Wole, I'd like to go back to General Allen's comments on battlefield courage and look beyond war when the bullets aren't flying. Do you think courage is still instinctual, or can it also be introspective? You know, if you have to think about it long and hard before you come to the right decision, is that just as heroic as having the split-second conviction to do the right thing?
Split second, I'm not very sure about, even though that comes into it. If it's split second, then of course you're talking about instinct, the inability to tolerate the intolerable. But ultimately, I think that expression has been used, the need to live at peace with oneself, which of course is also part of character. To understand, to be able to pursue a particular cause, whether carefully thought out or instinctual, which enables you to feel whole, a whole, entire human being. It's one of the reasons why, for me today, it's not difficult at all to identify what we might call heroism in this day and age, which of course is also the result of a historical sense that I have and carry about with me all the time. I know, for instance, what my relationship is with literature, and began reading from very early age, very, very early, according to my teachers. And my horror at discovering that there was a period when people of my kind could be castrated in this country, could be tarred and feathered for daring to read, revealing that they could read by their slave masters, with tarred and feathered. It was just a horror to me that any people ever went through that passage. And today, we have a repeat of that history in the plight of especially women in certain parts of the world, including my part, the northern part, where a woman who attempts to go to school to read can have her throat cut, in which women are persecuted. And so it's very easy for me, because of that historical sense and my inability to reconcile my own experience, with what is happening to the plight of others, the heroism today for me is defined by those young women, those pupils, the Malala, what I call the Malala type, who despite the danger to themselves, the daily danger to themselves, despite what they see happening to their siblings, insist on going to school. Insist, like as in Algeria, for instance, the whole history of Algeria is a lesson for all of us. And today heroism is defined, for me, mostly because of my historical conditioning, but defined is to be found, to be extracted, the essence of those young people, the character that compels them again and again to defy those who say, no, you dare not read, you cannot read because you're a woman. You're supposed to be veiled from head to toe, you're not supposed to see a book. And so my heroes today, are to be found in places like northern Nigeria, Somalia, parts of Mauritania, in Mali at one stage, in the history of Algeria, because that's history still very much with us. Now, that's my definition of heroism. Those girls need to be able to live with themselves, to feel entire, whole human beings. And so they go on taking the risk to go to school.
Amen. The woman sitting to your left has exhibited another kind of amazing heroism. And Anchee, it's been in the unflinching honesty of your writing, a writing in America where you're free to write, not like where you grew up, but what you wrote and what you've written has been remarkable. Have you agonized over sharing aspects of your personal experience that others may have kept secret? I mean, it certainly caused some tensions within your family. As you look at writing more broadly, does learning about a person's foibles, their mistakes, make them less likely to be celebrated for their acts of courage? Or is the recognition that they too are human make them more heroic?
Yes, yes. That's what I try to convey. I realize that it is the fact that they're more human. You're just like, being a hero is, I think, is like you last 5 minutes longer. And the things I struggled the most was, because I learned my English in my 30s, and I just couldn't be good enough. And I tried to convey that. I'm raising an American daughter. The only heroic acts I could think of I did was to be able to tell her the truth, and that really takes courage. I would think that that's the American transformation that did in me, and also the courage to stand up to her. I mean, every mother here knows that being an American mother, it's your child, it's the home front. It's really a battle. I stood up to my daughter and denied her birthday parties, for example. I was a divorced single mother, and my daughter Lorianne was, when she was young, she had to help me lifting drywalls and carry cement bags, 50 pounds, and mix them when I was working as construction, tiling floor tiles. And I feel bad to deny her, but I feel that it's something that she needs to be educated. So on her birthday, because I couldn't afford her birthday, I'm not gonna slap my face and make it swell so I can say I was well fed. So I took her to Home Depot. And my gift to her was a free lesson on how to use electric power saw and a book called Plumbing 1, 2, 3. And also I said, I want good grades. I say, you're getting the grades, it's the only way you can dig yourself out of poverty. And I think she feels that getting A's is easier than dealing with me. Because I say, you know, I don't speak English, but I can tell from A to B. And you have no good reason not bring me A. Oh, we go see your teacher. We go see your teacher now. And you know, American kids, they freak out to have their mother walking on the campus. And today she's at, 2 days ago, right before I came, she called me from Stanford. She's a senior student at Stanford University. And she says, Mama, my birthday, I wanted to give a wonton party. And I want you to come and demonstrate how to make a wonton for my friends. And you know what wonton is, right? It's like a fancy version of ravioli. And I went, and she's got like 20 friends. I mean, these kids, they could be brilliant. They are brilliant kids on like science, math, and they're working on electric airplanes, drones, and they are like inventing new biodrugs and mechanic engineering. They're passionate about topics, but they make lousy wonton. That's it.
I should have also noted in your introduction that you are the original Tiger Mother.
I don't know about that. It's actually, I think, my husband, he's the Tiger father. You ask my daughter, she would tell you, he is a former US Marine, a Vietnam vet, an English teacher. So I told him, I say, I'm going to see General Allen. Do you have anything to say? Ask me to bring word to him. And he says, simplify. And I said, what does that mean? And he says, he knows. And then right before we came on the stage and when we introduced the back green room, General Allen, can you tell what happened?
Well, you told me that you were married to a Marine, and I was commenting on his enormously good judgment. But then I said, please tell him Semper Fi.
Thank you.
You know, John, let me go back to battlefield heroism for a moment. You know, during the Second World War, Americans knew our battlefield heroes. As you noted to me in an earlier conversation, you know, we paraded them around the nation to get people to buy war bonds. Today, we're a war-weary country. The very nature of our modern wars have made it challenging to identify heroes. You know, counterinsurgency operations aren't like the March to Berlin, and many of our most daring special ops missions rightly have to remain classified. As a result, you know, most Americans couldn't name a single Medal of Honor recipient from the Iraq or Afghan wars. What's the consequence of this for our military and for our society?
It's not inconsequential, and it worries me, frankly. We're very nearly at the end of the American involvement in combat in Afghanistan. And on that day, on the 31st of December 2014, for 13 years, 2 wars, the American presence in East Asia, the American forward presence in the Gulf, the Persian Gulf, and other hotspots, our special operators moving around the planet, defending us as we sleep. All of that will have been done on the shoulders of less than 1 million people. Less than 1% of the American population on any given day is involved in the defense of this nation. In World War II, there were about 16 million Americans who were in uniform and fighting on a moment-to-moment basis. It was a different time. And as you and I talked, much of the celebration of the heroism in those days was not just to celebrate the hero and hopefully to instill inspiration across the population, but was in a very real sense the idea of the war bond drives, and those were extraordinarily important at the time. But today, and when I was Commandant of Midshipmen at Annapolis, we frequently had midshipmen entering the class who didn't have anyone alive in their families who had ever served in uniform. And so the burden of 2 wars and forward presence and constant readiness on a very small element of the population, and the absence, I think, in general of the celebration of the heroism that, for me, watching our magnificent soldiers and Marines and airmen and sailors and our civilians, that heroism is so remarkable. It says so much about the state of the society of this country. I think it's a loss to America. We miss the opportunity every single day when we aggrandize or we celebrate the bad behavior of certain components within our society, yet we fail to spend a few minutes talking about the routine heroism of our young privates and lance corporals at the very edge of American influence who are truly keeping the wolf from the door. So I think what we've done is we've missed the opportunity to inspire large segments of our population. Inspire, again, is to fill them with the spirit, to give them a sense that the inherent nature of heroism and courage is about character. We've missed that opportunity, and I wish we did more of it. And we've had just a very few of our young soldiers in this case, who have been presented the Medal of Honor. And the coverage is about a day long, and then we're back to something else. And that something else, in the end, we have to ask ourselves, does that contribute a bit to the national character, and in most cases, it doesn't. So I worry about that, and I wish that we could spend more time focusing on those heroes. But there's a really important point that's been made here this afternoon, and that is it can't just be about heroism in combat. It's got to be about the moral courage that animates large segments of our population to do the right thing every single day. And so a consequence, perhaps, of being a great nation and being able to be a great nation on the shoulders of a very small segment of the population is that our aperture for the definition of courage and heroism needs to be expanded. And we ought to be routinely celebrating the Malalas. We ought to be routinely celebrating our scientists and our journalists who break that important story that informs our population, because in many ways, they are just as much a hero in what they've contributed to the security and to the future of our great nation as a lance corporal that moves forward in the Russia battle. And so it's really important that we understand the broader definition of heroism, and we seek to celebrate that heroism in every possible way we can to inspire our young children to the heights of character that will prepare them at that moment of truth to make the right decision, whether it's in government or whether it's in business or whether it's in the military. And I think that's my concern today. We do not celebrate it enough because we have lost the ability to define it widely enough for our whole society.
David?
Well, General, you lost me when you started celebrating journalists. I wanted to plug one hole, which I think you got to, which was and I think you just mentioned there at the end, the heroism of everyday life, that the labor camps and the activism and the combat, that's the dramatic moment of heroism. But I'm sure we're all going to remember in a few weeks the heroism of the Home Depot. And by the way, if your daughter can still do plumbing, I want to introduce her to my son. But you know, that is that everyday act of confronting your kid. And I would just recommend to people, they Google Ryne Sandberg and Hall of Fame speech. Those of you from Chicago will know that Ryne Sandberg was a second baseman with the Chicago Cubs, and he gave a great speech when he was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame, where he said, you know, I just tried to play the game the way the guy before me played it, which is I was just one of a long line of Chicago Cubs players, and I just wanted to do it the way they did it. I wasn't trying to do anything new. So that meant when I bunted, I tried to bunt well. When I hit a double, I hustled all the way. When I hit a home run, I didn't celebrate. I just ran around the damn bases. And it's about being an institutionalist, of seeing yourself as a steward, as part of an organization, and just trying to play by the rules that were set before you got there and pass them along. And there's an Albert Schweitzer sentence that there are no heroes of courage, there are only heroes of renunciation. And to me, that willingness to subserve yourself to an institution is sort of the things that anybody can do, whatever company they're in, or whatever firm, or whatever profession.
We have less than a minute left, and I'd just love to go down the line here, starting with you, Wole. Just a few brief closing thoughts to this remarkable day. And this panel cuts across cultures and continents, yet there are, it strikes me, universal aspects to heroism. And I'd love for each of you to just share with the audience a few brief thoughts in the seconds we have left, what you see some of the essential universality in the characteristics of heroes.
Well, I'd just say briefly, the ability to take risks in order to be at peace with oneself.
For me, I think it's do what you truly believe, like tonight, like this event, and the courage of Tina Brown.
I guess I'd just say self-quieting when you read about them. There's a great C.S. Lewis line. When you meet a truly humble man, he won't be a smarmy person who's thinking about how humble he was. He'll just be seen like an interesting person who's interested in what you had to say. He won't be thinking about his own humility or his own heroism. He won't be thinking of himself at all. And there are those moments of self-quieting when the people who are doing heroic action just aren't thinking about themselves.
And I couldn't agree more with you. The greatest character traits that I've seen, both in combat but also in peace, has been the humble leader, the humble individual who seeks to serve a cause greater than himself. And when she is confronted with crisis, or he is confronted with an emergency, is willing to sacrifice everything, everything, for the principles that they hold most dear. That, to me, is heroism.
Before I ask you to join me in thanking this group, Tino is going to come back up on stage for a moment to close out this part of the summit. As she comes up, please join me in thanking this remarkable group of simply extraordinary individuals. Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing that. It was fantastic. Really
Good to see you.
Fabulous.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Wole. Yeah. What a remarkable closing to our afternoon. It was so nurturing to the spirit in the middle of so much rancor and divide and just inferior behavior around us everywhere at the moment politically. To hear from these people of such character, moral reflection, incredible intellectual, refreshment, I think, that we've all felt just by listening to you today. I mean, I love what General Allen said when you said, General, character is the daily habit of doing right versus wrong, placing your moral courage above all things. And David, when you said, no heroes, of course, only heroes of renunciation. These are things that we can all take home as our kind of feelings about this afternoon. And I really, really want to thank all of you so much for doing it. And also, I'd like to thank again, of course, and also Rajiv, who I admire so much. There are journalistic heroes. He's one of mine. So thank you again to our Hero Summit sponsors, Jeep, IBM, and AT&T. So grateful for you for helping us to make this happen. And of course, all our great veterans and those who serve in every way, in and out of uniform, who are with us today. We just salute you and thank you. I also have to thank my very own team, Rubicon, at the Daily Beast, who have been such incredible generals, majors, in every category to make this event go so well today. And I want us all to have a little break now before we go to the museum, because we're going to see an amazing movie tonight, those of you who can come. Buses are departing from the W Hotel at 6:15 and 6:45 to bring you there for dinner, and our exclusive sneak preview 2 months before anyone else gets to see it of the very raw, very real film from Universal Pictures, Lone Survivor, starring Mark Wahlberg, directed by Peter Berg. And I have seen this movie, and I'm telling you, forget about everything else you've heard about the Oscars. This movie is the big sleeper for the Oscars. And it's the story of the unbelievable bravery of the SEAL team who were caught in the terrible firefight in Afghanistan, Operation Red Wing. And after it, I will be able to interview for a little bit afterwards the director, Peter Berg, and of course, the original lone survivor, Marcus Luttrell, who is played by Wahlberg in the movie. So bring your popcorn, relax, think about everything you've heard today. I hope our panelists will also be able to join us. But if not, thank them again. It's been amazing, and I'll see you later. Thank you.